Hi guys, and welcome to Sourdough Slingers. In this lesson we're going to make sourdough starter from scratch using the no discard method, which is a method where we throw none of the flour that we feed this starter away whatsoever. You will see loads of recipes in books, on YouTube, wherever. They tell you to throw half of this away. We're throwing half your flour away. How crazy is that? I'm going to cover some top tips, recipe, some step-by-step method guides. Once you've created your sourdough starter, keeping it alive. So, what is a sourdough? What's going on in here? I've only added flour and water, yet this is starting to ferment. There's lots of carbon dioxide activity, you can see from the pockets there. Also, it smells really fruity, lactic, acetic, it smells full flavoured. This is an established sourdough that I've created using the no discard method, and it's about 12 days old and I've thrown no flour away. So I'm not putting anything else in there apart from flour and water. So what's going on? There's a couple of factors that influence sourdough and make it ferment. And that is, one, the natural environment, so our atmosphere, what's around us basically, is permeating into the dough or the sourdough, okay? The biggest factor though is the grain. On the outside of the grain, there is bacteria and wild yeast that are naturally there. When the miller mills that into flour, it goes into the flour. So that when we mix our flour with water, we begin to activate those. When we activate them, it takes time for them to come alive, start feeding and reproducing. That's why it takes at least 3 to 5 days to create a healthy sourdough that you can then bake with and then go on to feed to keep alive. Technical blurb. Here's a few top tips to help you get through this sourdough process. 1. Wash your hands before you start. What we don't want to do is put any bad microorganisms into our sourdough system. We want to try and encourage the good probiotic bacteria and the healthy yeasts. Flour. Which flour should you use? For me, what works best is untreated, organic, wholesome flours. They have lots of nutrition in them, which helps the bacteria and the wild yeast flourish. What type of container should I use? Glass is fine. This is a kiln jar. A clean jam jar will be fine. What I've done is removed the gasket. So normally these kiln jars come with one of these. You don't need them for sourdough, as it will let the carbon dioxide that's produced release nice and easily from there. Plastic tub is fine with a lid. You don't have to press the lid on fully. That's absolutely fine. The biggest no-no is metal. Don't use a metal container. It will have adverse reactions with the sourdough. So you've got your container and you're mixing your sourdough. What do you use? Well, you can use your hands if they'll fit in. You could use a wooden spoon. You could use a plastic spatula. Or even a nickel wooden spoon, a special one. So you can use it to stir that way and then scrape down that way. It's up to you really. Another great top tip is investing in a digital thermometer. They aren't essential, but they really do help you control the water temperature and you're sure what's going in every time. Remember, the lactobacilli, the bacteria, and the yeast are sensitive to temperature. So if we're consistent with our water temperatures using a digital thermometer, then we will have more success. Water. We've talked about temperature, but the type of water you use. Now, I have used tap water and had success with sourdough starters. The best way is to filter your water. If you think about water, it's got chlorine in it, which kills bacteria. We're trying to stimulate probiotic bacteria, so good bacteria. So we need to make sure that we're giving our sourdough starter the best fighting chance possible by using filtered water. Day 1. Creating a sourdough from scratch. Our water temperature should be around 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. That's hot water. If you haven't got a temperature probe, just do it by feel. We can either weigh out with teaspoons or with scales. This recipe calls for 4 teaspoons of water and 1 teaspoon of white bread flour and 1 teaspoon of rye meal or wholemeal flour. Using the really warm water will kickstart the wild yeasts and lactobacilli. Next we add in the flour. Here is the white flour. And here is the dark rye flour. You can use wholemeal flour. Dark rye flour is absolutely packed with nutrients and really speeds up the fermentation and stimulates the bacteria and wild yeasts. Now we start to mix. So I'm going to use the other end of this now to scrape it. Notice I'm gathering the starter into a clump. This will help to encourage fermentation. That's it. That's all we need. And because we're working with small amounts of flour, it means we don't have to throw loads of it away each time. These are microorganisms that don't need that much flour, okay? So this is absolutely fine. And this is how the no discard method works best. Now cover and rest for a further 24 hours at room temperature. Day 2. On day 2, all we're doing is simply repeating the process as for day 1, even the same ingredient quantities. Just simply keep adding the water and the flours into the same jar or container. After 24 hours of resting, you can see that the dough's relaxed a little bit. There isn't much aroma, it almost smells a little bit like putty or linseed. Hardly any bubbles either. Now we're going to mix more flour and water in at the same ratios, so 1 teaspoon of white flour, rye flour and 4 teaspoons of water at 50 degrees Celsius. By the time we've mixed the warm water and the flour together, the temperature of the sourdough will be about 30 degrees Celsius. That's a really good temperature for the wild yeast and bacteria to thrive in. Cover and allow to rest for another 24 hours at room temperature. Day 3. After another 24 hours of resting, you can definitely see lots more visible bubbles on the top. That means we've got yeast activity. It also smells slightly yogurty. This means we've started to activate the lactic acids. The acetic acids aren't there yet, they take longer to develop. We're still using water between 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. to stimulate yeast and bacteria activity. Repeat the same process as for day 1 and 2. All mixed and ready to rest for another 24 hours. Day 4. Now at day 4, we're really beginning to see a change in this sourdough starter. The volume's grown a lot, so we've got carbon dioxide being produced by the wild yeasts and the lactic acids. It's very yogurty, and it's also got some acetic notes coming through, and it smells a little bit like Bramley apple. On day 4, we change recipe and temperatures. We double up on all the ingredients and lower the water temperature to about 20 degrees Celsius. So 8 teaspoons of 20 degrees water, 2 teaspoons of white untreated bread flour and 2 teaspoons of dark rye flour. We're increasing the flour and water because we've got more microorganisms to feed, and also we're reducing the temperature because we've got an established colony of bacteria and wild yeasts. All mixed and ready to rest for another 24 hours. Day 5. After another 24 hours of fermentation, we're into day 5, and we've got it. We have lots of fermentation in here, plenty of carbon dioxide production from the yeast and bacteria. It smells really ripe and fruity. All of this has been achieved without throwing any discard away. We've not wasted 1 gram of flour. We've used about 90 grams in total to feed the starter. A lot of recipes that use discard method actually start with 100 grams of flour on the first day. There's no wonder that in that process that they typically throw away about 600 grams of flour. That's enough to make 2 loaves. If you think about it like this, if the population of the UK is about 66 million, if 1% throw this away, that's 660,000 people throwing 600 grams of flour away, which is the equivalent of wasting 1.3 million loaves. Starting with very small amounts of flour is key to the no discard method. Once you've created your starter, you need to feed it flour and water to keep it alive. So this is ready to bake with, but we're going to now feed it. Okay. Feeding your sourdough could not be easier. For my sourdough feed, I use 8 teaspoons of water at 20 degrees C and 2 teaspoons of untreated white flour and 2 teaspoons of wholemeal flour or whole grain flour. And I add this to roughly the same amount of starter. If you have more starter, then simply add more flour and water, but keep the ratios the same. It really is up to you which flours you choose to feed your starter with. I've decided against the rye because I want to reduce the amount of aceticness and produce more sweetness by using wholemeal flour. You don't even have to blend flours, it could just be 1 flour. Just remember, try to stick to untreated, organic and wholesome flours where possible. How often should you feed your sourdough starter? It all depends, and it's very fluid and open to interpretation. If you're baking on a regular basis, then you should feed your sourdough every day, and typically you would store your sourdough at room temperature. My room temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. Everyone's room temperature will be different. If it's a really hot room temperature, like 30 degrees, then you may consider a few things, like using cold water to feed your starter and placing the starter into the refrigerator. If you don't bake as often, then once a week is fine, but you must place it into the refrigerator. This will slow down the yeast and bacteria activity and not consume the food. Remember this simple rule: hotter temperatures will require more feeding, cooler temperatures less feeding. Remember, our yeast and bacteria are sensitive to temperature.